Hello. My project is identity, race, region, and belonging. How does where you live affect how you live? I teach sixth grade world cultures, and that is the question I ask my students at the beginning of every unit. This presentation will look at race relations, racial identity, and regional differences between New England and Texas. What is culture? According to the APA, it is values and beliefs passed from one generation to the next within a social group. I teach my students that cultural elements are found in all cultures, such as music, religion, language, and clothing. However, I believe that culture is our self concept, not just what is passed down to us. Chapter 11 of the textbook explains that for young children, self concept is observable features like I have blue eyes, meaning they notice similarities and differences early on. As they grow into adolescence, they begin to create multiple selves depending on context, such as family, friend group, and regional expectations. Racial identity is complex, but for young children, race can be boiled down to phenotypes, meaning that when they begin noticing similarities and differences, they are now categorizing racial phenotypes. A study by Cato notes that regional demographics can affect a child's self concept and sense of belonging, and that geographic location can play a role in feelings of isolation. Does racial identity trump regional identity, or is it the other way around? Shrikant states that in Texas, white people don't identify as white, but rather by their regional identity as a Texan. Even I myself do this. However, in other parts of the country, like New England, race comes first. This can make Texas welcoming while making New England isolating. I am multiracial, and for me, the boundaries between my white side and non white side have been clearly divided by region. My mom is from New England, Massachusetts, New Hampshire area, and they came over 10 years after the Mayflower, white as can be. My dad's side of the family is from Texas and very mixed, including being Native American. According to my DNA, I am 27% Native American and can trace my ancestry back to a man listed as an Indian servant on a Texas census, but I can't figure out his tribe, which leaves me tribeless. Not having a tribe makes me feel like I am missing a huge part of my identity, and it is nearly impossible to find this ancestor's tribe on my own. When I had to fill out any type of government form, I am not legally allowed to put that I am Native American because I am not affiliated with any tribe, despite the fact that it is a quarter of who I am. I previously thought the Adai-Caddo was the correct tribe, but even if that were true, they are not federally recognized. They are state recognized but not federally recognized, meaning that none of their members can put Native American on their forms either. The government makes it difficult to become recognized, leaving many people in my situation. Now, the question is whether our cultural identity is made up by our label or someone else's label, like the government's. As you can see from the demographics given by the US Census Bureau, Massachusetts is a fairly homogeneous white state. It can make newcomers feel more like outsiders when they don't fit the common phenotype. Whereas Texas has many races, cultures, and phenotypes within the Texas identity. School attachment or belonging is foundational to student success. Chang mentioned that school attachment can be affected based on how marginalized a student feels. Chang shows same race density as a determining factor of school attachment. Here are the demographics of both my mother's high school and my high school to show how one might feel more isolating than the other. Texas is an identity that many have clung to as their main identity. You can see that in the obsession over HEB tortillas and Texas flags. Texas and much of the South tends to have a collective culture that often exceeds race. Cooper and Davis share the uniqueness of the SEC compared to other football conferences to highlight regional cultural cohesiveness. In New England, a shared culture does exist, mostly centered around love of Dunkin' Donuts and St. Patrick's Day. However, most of their culture is centered around specific demographics and what has been called settler culture. Many of their big get togethers come from white centered holidays and culture rather than New England culture. Although there is much to be said about the benefits for minority and biracial youth to grow up in a diverse area, I am truly speaking of modern instances. I don't want to downplay or erase the history of slavery or segregation. While slavery and segregation have been worse in Texas, New England faces the challenge of still being largely segregated today. On my father's side of the family, we all look similar. I felt no different than anyone else in my family. My grandmother was a Longhorn fan and voted differently than my dad, but we shared our Texas identity. It wasn't until the 2008 election that I began to notice racial differences. I was 12 and in middle school at the time. My school was fairly diverse, and I never felt out of place. But during the 2008 election, race became a big talking point at my school. We held a mock election in the cafeteria, and I was told on multiple occasions by my peers that it was racist to not choose Obama and that I was too brown to vote for McCain, things I had never once considered before in Texas. On the New England side of things, I always had a difficult time feeling as though I belonged. Like the textbook says, self concept for young children begins with concrete observations. A core memory for me was that I had brown hair and I couldn't dye my hair with Kool Aid packets like my cousins. I didn't understand race at the time, but I knew I was different from the rest of my family. I lived in New York for 2 years in elementary school. Although it is not technically New England, it was only about 2 hours from my mom's family. The school was noticeably less diverse, and despite being physically in the north and physically closer to my family, the sense of belonging never came, leading me to believe that my racial identity mattered more than my regional identity up north. Why does this all matter? The textbook states self esteem is often built upon the acceptance or rejection of others. Students with self esteem issues often do worse in school, creating consequences for post secondary life. Using commutative property, it can be hypothesized that racial marginalization creates negative post secondary consequences. There may be some bias in my beliefs, but there was an ample amount of studies supporting my personal experiences. My New England family is wonderful, but I still felt different and had self esteem issues around them. I can only imagine that those feelings would be exacerbated for students in schools full of strangers that they don't fit in with, potentially harming their well being and post secondary success.